Talking about extinction, a little article that came out the other day got me started. This was an older article that puts it in the right context. Here it is. Okay. It says, curiously, while we have ample evidence of Neanderthal DNA in humans, we have yet to find an example of modern human DNA in Neanderthals. Okay. And this came out in 2024, this year really, but it's an old, we've known this for a long time, that Neanderthals don't have any human DNA. Okay, and they try to look for reasons, etc., right? They're trying to justify that. But there was an article this week and says the opposite. They reach a different conclusion. How did they do it? Did they go and test a Neanderthal and measure him or anything? No. They went out there and looked at a few reports, put them together, and this is their conclusion. They did it on the basis of mathematics, okay, as always, right? And here it is. So a paper this week in Science concludes Neanderthals inherited as much as 10% of their genome from modern humans. And the way they did it is they took sub-Saharan Africans and data that they had from them, right? And they said, look, we're going to look for how much genetic variability they have. I mean, this is the present, right? And they looked at whether the Neanderthals had similar DNA, and they said they do. And so they concluded that they couldn't have gotten it from on their own. They had to get it from us somehow. And that's how they concluded that Neanderthals have up to 10% DNA. So it's a mathematical footwork there, that's all it is. And they're changing the policy. They have to find a way of showing that Neanderthals have our blood and we have Neanderthal blood because they have no explanation for the extinction of the Neanderthals. And the way they look at it, we humans, right, we're responsible for all background extinctions. The dodo bird disappeared because we killed him. The thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger, he disappeared. Why? Because we killed him. And we killed everything. The passenger pigeon, the great auk, we killed them all. And they never thought that there could be another mechanism at work. Okay, and that's the issue. Did we kill all the mammoths and all the mastodons? We're responsible for all of them. And so when they look at Neanderthal, they say, well, how do we explain the disappearance of Neanderthal? Very simple. The original theories were that we killed them, we outcompeted them. Maybe it was the weather. You have all these weather guys. They say, well, it's the climate change, and they couldn't adapt. And then they finally said, no, we got it. Now we finally got it. They intermarried with us, and they were a smaller population, and they dissolved into a bigger population. And what happened was that they bequeathed to us some of their genes, up to 2%, 2 to 4%, they say. And because of that, we inherited maybe some defenses and some weaknesses from the Neanderthals, what they were, some of the diseases they were susceptible to, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's the situation. And what happened was that, they created a cottage industry of how the Neanderthals disappeared and what kind of DNA we have from them and what kind of diseases. And there's a whole cottage industry on DNA. And a lot of people say, well, it's got to be true because, we get all these criminal cold cases that we can solve thanks to DNA. So people trust this DNA thingy quite a bit, And one thing is to apply it to cold cases that are 40, 50 years old. Another thing is to apply some of that reasoning to what happened 50,000 years ago in the Upper Paleolithic. And so all I can tell you, be very careful with the data out there. And one fellow wrote the following. He asked a question. He says, Neanderthal lived also in the Middle East and maybe India, not just Europe. We have DNA from the Middle East, Neanderthals. Absolutely not. Okay. So that's the short answer. Let's go with the long answer here. Okay. First of all, here we have a couple of papers that were out there. I'm just going to mention two of them because there's a lot more, but just so that you know, okay? Humans have no mitochondrial DNA from Neanderthal. Okay, mitochondrial DNA is passed from females to the population, to their offsprings. So there's no human on Earth that has a Neanderthal mother that can prove, or somehow, that there's any evidence that we have Neanderthal, that we ever had Neanderthal mothers, except the people at the Max Planck Institute. Their mothers were all Neanderthals. And I just wonder what cave they came out of, No human male has any Neanderthal Y chromosome, okay? And so we cannot show, no human male can prove that he ever had in his lineage a Neanderthal, some kind of Neanderthal out there that fathered him or fathered his father or his grandfather. Okay, so we have none of these two markers. Okay, no Y chromosomes and no mitochondrial DNA. Okay, we have none of that from the Neanderthals. And as I just said, the Neanderthals have not inherited any DNA from humans. And so they had to find a way of putting it together and say, well, yeah, maybe if we look at the sub-Saharan people and compare them with a Neanderthal, maybe we can do some fancy mathematical footwork and show that, we gave them some human DNA as well. So that's what they're up to. They're trying to prove it at all costs, okay, no matter what. Where all this started, really started like 40 years ago. You had people like Milford Wolpoff, Eric Trinkas, and these people are still around, by the way, John Hawkes, and all these people had no way of showing how the Neanderthals disappeared. So they said, hey, we can't prove it with climate change. We don't believe in that. We don't believe that humans outcompeted the Neanderthals because they had, very sophisticated weapons. The other guys came with slingshots and we came with drones, so we exterminated them. So they didn't believe all that. And so they said, no, there was a much more humane way of making them disappear. And the way we did it is we married them. And boy, that's you tell me. So they started with this admixture, interbreeding theory. And it finally culminated with Svante Pääbo's paper in 2010. They did a genome on 3 Neanderthals, and they concluded that the Neanderthals have, that we inherited 2 to 4%. At the time, I think it was just 2 to 3, then they extended it a little more. 2 to 3% Neanderthal blood in us, DNA, right? And so did they prove it? Did they really show without a shadow of a doubt that we inherited that from the Neanderthals by intermarrying with them? And the answer is no. The answer is that there were other opinions out there, but those got flushed out. The idea that was put forward is that we all descended from the same Homo erectus a long time ago. And one Homo erectus went to the Arctic regions, really, Northern Europe. And the other stayed in Africa or traveled to Africa. And so we have these two populations developing differently. And after 500,000, 800,000 years, of course, we were left with still some amount of DNA. Well, they didn't like that theory because that did not show how the Neanderthals disappeared. And that was the big problem, okay? And so they had to introduce this admixture or interbreeding theory. And so this is the paper that Svante Pääbo put out there, the draft sequence of the Neanderthal genome. You can see Pääbo's name right at the bottom. He would win the Nobel Prize in 2022 as a result of really that. But what you got to know, there was a lot of politics involved with this. Because if you look at what happened, give me a second here. If you look at what happened in 2007, okay, Time Magazine named Pääbo as a very influential person among the 100 most influential persons on the planet, and they did so because he got. They gave him the responsibility at the Max Planck Institute of deciding, this thing about the genome. He was going to be in charge of the project. And so they said, when this guy comes out with something, it's going to be groundbreaking. And it turns out he did. He already had these ideas about, interbreeding. When he got to 2010, 3 years later, he comes out with the genome, says, hey, we've proven At the time, it was just a suggestion, but he said, we've proven that, Neanderthals mated with us. Okay, and so his paper went out. It was a great success, and he created this new cottage industry, and because of that, they gave him the Nobel Prize. So it was all politics. It has nothing to do with science. This is what you find in the Wikipedia today. It says, Pablo and his team also concluded that there was, what? Probably, right? Interbreeding between Neanderthals and Eurasians. And then there's mainstream support for the theory, and then it says that this admixture could have occurred roughly between 50 and 60,000 years ago. Well, it turns out that, a recent paper also modified that, and they say, look, really, now it's up to 200,000 years ago we made it, and then we did it again in 100,000 years ago. There was all these phases that they had to show, right? That we kept interbreeding with them every time we found them, and so at all costs they're trying to prove interbreeding. Okay, so there's a lot of politics behind this, has really very little to do with science. Okay, so what did Pablo really say? And here are a couple of papers where talks that he gave where I got this information from, so you can see what's happening here. Okay. The first one is that he compares Africans against non-Africans. Okay, here it goes. It says, if there was contribution from Neanderthals to Europeans, we would expect Europeans to share more genetic variants with Neanderthals than what Africans do, since there were never Neanderthals in Africa. Okay, now the important thing here that I want you to focus on is that he's comparing Africans versus non-Africans. Okay, so it's Africa versus the rest of the world. Okay, that's the way they put it even to this day, and they flush a lot of the important detail out. They take it out and they don't let the public know too much about that. Okay, what's the issue? The issue is what you find in his paper, in his original paper, and here it is. He talks about it in another talk. He says, had there been contribution from Neanderthals, I would expect it to be in Europe and nowhere else, because Neanderthals lived in Europe and Western Eurasia. But we found it also where? In China and even Papua New Guinea, where everyone is sure there had never been Neanderthals. What's the issue here? The issue is that they found more Neanderthal DNA in Papuans and American Indians than they found in Europeans. And so they had a problem there, because now you have to explain that as well. Okay, and here it is. Here's a paper talked about. It says, scientists finally solved the mystery of why Europeans have less Neanderthal DNA than East Asians. And they have less than East Asians, less than American Indians. And according to a report from India itself, not American not American Indians, but India, right? They say even Indians have more Neanderthal DNA than Europeans. And so the question is, how do you answer that? And not so much how do you answer that, why don't they publish that? Why does that come out? Instead of saying Africans versus non-Africans, they should say, look, we have Africans versus Europeans, but just in case, Papuans, American Indians, and Indians from India, right? They have more DNA, Neanderthal DNA, than Europeans. And so how do you explain that? I mean, that's what they should be saying. Instead, they say, look, Europeans have more than Africans. And so we have a problem there, because that's manipulation of the data. That's what it is. And that hasn't trickled very well to the public. Okay, that's the issue. Okay, so this theory is out there. And what does Pablo say in addition to that? He says the following. He says, the model we proposed, how did we get all this DNA, right? Is to say that when these modern humans, right, came out of Africa, they presumably passed by the Middle East, okay? They became Muslims, I guess, right? These early humans mixed with the Neanderthals and then went on to become the ancestors of everybody. We're outside of Africa. Yeah, it's outside of Africa, right? They have to show that they don't say how the Papuans got it, or were they also in the Middle East or what, So they have to say outside of Africa, and that's how we got it. We got it by going to the Middle East and mating with them there in Israel and in Iraq, okay, supposedly in that region, because that's where they found some alleged Neanderthal bones, right? But what's the issue? The issue is that, and again, all these papers get flushed down the toilet. It's very hard to find them today. And if you're not aware, you don't even know about the issues. But here it is. Let's put it up there so that you can see. Here it is. This is a paper that they wrote, and this is not the only paper. They had other papers like this. There's actually little evidence for the existence of a Southwest Asiatic Neanderthal population in Israel during the Middle Paleolithic period. Human fossils originally labeled as Neanderthals were subsequently reevaluated and defined otherwise. A horizontal mandibular foramen, which characterizes, etc., the Neanderthals, is absent in, and they mention 3 sites. If you read the paper, they go off and say, in short, that what they have in the Middle East are not Neanderthals. Okay, those are not Neanderthals. If you compare the so-called Neanderthals of Shanidar Cave in Iraq, and you compare that against the classical Neanderthal, like, the original one in the Neanderthal Valley, and the ones in Spain and the ones in France, they're not the same. They have too many differences to say that this is a Neanderthal and that's a Neanderthal. It's very likely a different species altogether. That's probably what it is. Anyways, the deal is that, no Neanderthal was in Middle East. That's my take on that, all I can tell you. And part of the reason is that, Neanderthal was an Arctic creature. Remember the glaciers were all the way to northern England, northern France. They extended all the way down there, and that whole region was populated by Neanderthals, which were what? The offspring of Heidelbergs, which were the offsprings of ancestors, which were the offsprings of Homo erectus, which was the first fellow to go to Europe. We have footprints and evidence from bones that they found, woolly mammoth bones in that region, and it was some kind of human that killed that animal. And so we have evidence that in the days of Homo erectus, almost 1 million years ago, really closer to like 800,000 years ago, where Homo erectus, or some maybe antecessor, maybe Heidelberg, was already in the Arctic. And you say, how did he get there? Because we hadn't invented clothes. And so these people, these individuals, this species that was there, was nude, completely nude, in the Arctic. Okay, so keep that in mind. There's no clothes. And so they got adapted to the clothes little by little over thousands of years. They lived there for thousands of years. From that original seed, you get the Neanderthals hundreds of thousands years later. Neanderthal was completely adapted to the Arctic. He had no clothes, ever. They never invented clothes. Okay? Especially, we never found a needle. They had no needles. They had no use for needles because they didn't sew and they didn't put, furs around themselves like they're always shown. No, they were completely nude. And I picture them as very hairy. There was a woolly man. And he was in his habitat. He had no shoes. He stepped on the snow, on the ice, okay, with his feet, with his bare feet, okay, just so you know what we're talking about here, okay? And so, what this Svante Pabo did, he's brushed a lot of that, swept all that data under the rug, there he is. He brushed in the empty DNA, the Y chromosomes, the fact that the Asians and American Indians and so on, they had more DNA, more Neanderthal DNA than Europeans, which nobody can really explain, and nobody cares about that. Everybody just went into the cottage industry of saying, oh, let's see what diseases we have and how much DNA we have from the Neanderthals, and they went out to a lot of nonsense that has nothing at all to do with anything. Especially not with the extinction of the Neanderthals. No, Neanderthals never mated with us, and it just shows that these people don't know even the basics of anthropology, because no animal mates in the wild. Two different species. They don't do that in the wild. aside from the fact that we were separated from the Neanderthals for 500,000 years, we couldn't have had successful children from them. That's another issue. But the point is, when you're in the wild, the worst thing you can do is trust. There's no such thing as faith. Trust, belief, all that comes later with humans. Many hundreds, thousands of years later. In the jungle, you don't trust anybody, okay? Because that's your enemy. That's that other animal there, he's out to kill you because he needs to eat. And that's the way it works. Neanderthal wouldn't trust a human. Neanderthal wouldn't trust another Neanderthal. Okay, so it's not like the clans got together, drank beer, and swapped wives. No, it didn't work that way. There could have been kidnapping. There could have been other ways where they met and they mingled and had children and created their own clans. That, yeah. But clans did not trust the neighboring clan. They all protected their own territory. They probably marked their territory by pissing or shitting around the block, You had to mark your territory. This is my hunting ground, bud. You get out of here. You're not part of our clan. That's the way it worked. And if humans ventured in there, they would have been slaughtered, okay? Because you have a small pack of humans moving into Neanderthal territory. They're not only on their own ground, they're on their own territory. They wore no clothes. The other guys had to put something on because they were freezing to death, so it's humans who invented clothes, and they would have been slaughtered. And that would explain why humans were already in China way before they got to Europe. And you say, how can that possibly be? Europe is, just a little north of Africa, and Asia is on the other side. Well, I think that humans did venture into Europe, but they got slaughtered. That's what happened. And it's only when the Neanderthals imploded, when their own population imploded, that's when we could enter Europe. And yeah, I'm sure that they went into caves and found, skeletons. Who the hell is this guy? And it was a Neanderthal that had died a long time ago. There was no mating, no such monster. Anyways, here's a summary on some of that. Involves this fellow, Svante Pabo. He's an idiot. Okay, he's an individual with big ideas. That's what an idiot is. And yeah, we have no empty DNA, no mitochondrial DNA. We have no Y chromosomes, and we have and Neanderthals have no human DNA. And again, different species don't mate in the wild, and the question is whether we were the same species or two different races, right? Because you take two dogs, you take a Doberman and you take a Chihuahua, and they'll mate because they're the same species. They're just two different races. And the question is whether we were like that together with our long-lost cousins, the Neanderthals, or whether we were two different species after 500, 600,000 years of not seeing each other. Were we the same even species? Could we have mated, have viable children, right? Then you got all these problems that I mentioned, and you can see it in my series there where I talk about admixture. Look it up in my channel. But you have the issue of shouting distance. No one could venture too far away from the clan in any of those, whether it's human or Neanderthal. They could not venture too far because you don't know what kind of animal can get you out there, let alone, saying that they had a one-night stand, with another species, We found no half-breeds. These people talk about trade, that we traded seashells for furs or who knows what, Trade was not invented at least until the Neolithic. And for these people to talk about trade in the upper Paleolithic, these people really have mental problems. Then you have the question of looks. And I think that's an important one. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this. This is a Neanderthal compared to us. Look at the skulls, okay? And you can see that they're a little bit different. And they have an elongated skull in the back. They have heavy brows, which we don't have. Big noses, right? Ours is a tiny little nose. They have big noses. And above all, they had no chin. And we have chin. We're the only animal that has chins, okay? Says another thing that is very distinct in Homo sapiens is the fact that we do have a chin. This protuberance here is very unique to Homo sapiens and is absent completely from the mandible of Neanderthals. And here, just in case, let me show you more evidence on that. Here it is. One site for geology says, no, really, other animals don't have chins. Okay, that's correct. We are the only animals on Earth with true chins. Even our extinct relatives, Homo erectus, as well as chimpanzees and gorillas, do not have chins. And you can see the chin is not there. Ours is pointed outwards, whereas all theirs are pointed inwards. So you can see that Neanderthal was a little different than us. We didn't really look like them. Okay, and so for these people to say that we mated with this monkey, right? It's a little far-fetched. So just for your own sake, take all these things with a grain of salt, right? And then what's the issue? The issue is also clothes. You can imagine us coming with clothes. Here's how Neanderthal evolved in the 20th century. He evolved more in the 20th century than the Upper Paleolithic. Here he is. This was the 1909 original Neanderthal. And look how he changed over the years. Man, talk about evolution. Yeah, they had to make him more white, okay, less monkey-like. They had to make him less furry, right, over time. And just in case, eventually they ended up dressing him with clothes. But you can see that their thorax was quite different than ours. Their heads were different than us. These were monkeys. These were just some kind of monkey, a furry monkey that lived in the Arctic that evolved from Homo erectus ultimately. And it's funny here, you can see they dress them up with clothes today. And you say, where did they get the clothes? Did they go to a store or what? They had some caves that sold them or what? So this is part of the problem, okay? And again, Svante was listed in Time magazine, as an influential person. And why was he important? Why? Because the paleontologists, they had no ideas how Neanderthal disappeared. And they had to find a way of getting an answer to that question. And the way they said, and what's survived until today, is that we mated with them. That's it. And that probably turned into a fact. The Svante Pabo was probably turned into a fact. And just in case, they gave him the Nobel to certify knowledge. That's the way you certify knowledge these days. You give them a Nobel Prize and then it probably becomes a fact. No longer probably, probable or whatever. Yeah, so this is the situation. The situation is that all these people have created this cottage industry and everybody's benefiting from it. Does it have anything to do with science? I call it political science. That's what it is, political science. It's got to do only with politics, with getting people to think about nonsense, about, mating between a monkey and a human and stuff like that. It's got nothing to do with what really happened. Here you're talking about a different animal, different species altogether, evolved in the Arctic. We came out of Africa. We invented clothes around the same time, coincidentally, while we were moving into Neanderthal territory, Arctic territory. We needed clothes, so we started stitching maybe, some furs together. And when Neanderthal saw this creature all dressed up with clothes, he must have ran the other way. He said, what the hell is that? A clothed human? What the hell is that? So, no, there was no mating. This has only to do with politics. We call it political science.